morning, friends. Welcome back to another episode of Coffee with Hales. Here we think critically and live intentionally. On this channel, we follow an array of topics from biblical studies to technocracy to gardening to coffee and conspiracy to backyard chickens to now the Epstein files. So I will be building on the last episode that I did, the Epstein files beyond the right and left. And this episode is going to be for someone who wants to understand more about the Epstein files and from a zoomed out kind of timeline perspective. So we're going to be going over who Epstein was and connecting things all the way to some of the Epstein files that have been released today and go through a basic timeline. I'm calling it Epstein 101. So if you're someone who feels a little bit overwhelmed but wants to learn more, this is going to be a good place for you to start. I also have amazing independent journalists who I follow linked below who go even more in depth, and a lot of my information is coming from them. And I also have all my sources linked below as well. So of course, as I say, always roll up your own sleeves, dig in, and do your own research. But again, if you're someone who wants to kind of understand some of the Epstein information but feels overwhelmed, Epstein 101 here on Coffee with Hales is going to be a good episode for you. So let's jump in. Jeffrey Epstein was born in 1953 to a Jewish family in Brooklyn, New York. His father, Seymour, was a groundskeeper. His mother, Pauline, was a school aide and a homemaker. Later in life, he did attend New York University, where he studied mathematical physiology, and he left in 1974 without receiving a degree. In September of 1974, he was hired by Donald Barr to work at the Dalton School, which is a really prestigious school in Upper East Manhattan. And it's still around today. It costs around $67,000 to go to the school, so still a really prestigious place. He was to teach calculus and mathematics, which was interesting, a lot of people have pointed out, because he did not receive a college degree. So how could someone without a college degree teach at such a prestigious school? Now, the person who hired Jeffrey Epstein to work at the Dalton School was Donald Barr. That name may sound familiar to you because you should be familiar, or at least recognize his son, William Barr, who served as the Attorney General of the United States under President George H. Bush and the attorney under President Donald Trump from 2019 to 2020. He also held other positions within the Department of Justice, including Deputy Attorney General and Assistant Attorney General for the Office of Legal Counsel. Now, William Barr is a little more connected to the Epstein story than just his father hiring Epstein to work at a prestigious school without a college degree. If you do search Barr in the Epstein files or in the emails on Gmail or on the Department of Justice, Barr's name does come up. Like many others, that doesn't necessarily mean anything. But if you look at the context of his name in the emails, it has been interesting, and some people have pointed out a few different things. So first, we're going to pull up this email, which it's been redacted who has sent it, but you do see that it says FBI on the side. I'm not sure what that means. I don't understand all of these documents, but you can see the importance says normal. It says, ladies, sorry for the timing of this email. Just saw late text on my phone and don't want to forget to send this. If you are in early, would you please handle task 1? Alex, let's work on manipulating the spreadsheet we have for number 2. Number 1 task, confirm we interviewed the cellmate of the first suicide attempt. Apparently the lawyer at time made an allegation that the cellmate tried to kill Epstein and send blank the 302. Number 2, take the names and build out a new spreadsheet with all the DROG on them. And you see there is a list here: Trump, Weinstein, Prince Andrew, Glenn Dubin, Jess Stanley, Leon Black, Les Wexner, Alan Dershowitz, Bill Clinton, Tony Blair, Howard Lutnick, Ponzi scheme and money laundering, Alexander Gust, Jean-Luc Brunel, William Barr for being present when a girl was raped. Now, this had to do with, if you see JE Task 724, I'm not sure with all the DRAG on them, it means derogatory information on them. Perhaps that can just be allegations that were made. I went and did a little more research into this and tried to find a little more context. So this was emailed the same day. The subject is blacked out, but I'm assuming it might have to do with the list that they were talking about. And if you see here, all those people are listed again, so I'm thinking this was a follow-up email. So Trump, and then we have Weinstein, and it goes through the allegations that were made. So I'm assuming these are just allegations that were made. I'm not saying this is necessarily what had happened, but these were allegations that were made in regards to the cellmate interview. So you'll see here we have William Barr, and for whatever reason they were wanting to track these allegations. I don't know if they were gonna refute them. I don't know what the motivation is. Again, the way they release these emails, it's really frustrating because you don't have context, so it's gonna leave you with even more questions, but I'm just gonna show you this is what people have been pointing out. We have William Barr, blank stated was at Epstein's for a model event, ran into Barr, who stated he wanted to see her the next time he came. Another point, Epstein asked if he had ever met Barr. NTOC claimed she was the victim of Epstein and that Barr was present during some of the abuse. Then you see there's notes that there was an orgy with Tony Blair, et cetera, et cetera. You could go on and look at these emails for yourself. Now, I did have to look up what the NTOC means because I didn't know what that meant, but that is basically where people would get a report or tips over the phone. So somebody put in a tip that Barr was present when some sort of abuse had happened and that he was there at that event. And that's part of what the allegations are in the Epstein emails with Barr. Now, also in regards to William Barr, I did find a girl who was posting some information of what she found in the Epstein files. Here it says, alleged Epstein victim claims that William Barr was present during the alleged sexual abuse of a child per the documents in the latest Epstein dump file. An FBI document alleges that former Attorney General William Barr was present during a child's sexual abuse linked to Jeffrey Epstein. The document describes the victim testimony from 2019 tip line call claiming that Barr identified as the current United States Attorney General at that time and was present at one of Epstein's Florida mansions during the abuse in 2006. The anonymous caller remembered being abducted and abused multiple times. The caller said they were a victim of Epstein's network, claiming that they were abused from 1994 to 2006. This person does put in the documents at the end of this Twitter post, which I will post in here as well, so you can see those for yourselves. But these are some allegations going around about William Barr. Again, these are all allegedly because we don't really know the full context of the situation in these emails, but for whatever reason, somebody was trying to put together a list of all the derogatory or salacious information being said by specific people and keeping it together on a spreadsheet. So I don't know what the intention was for that spreadsheet, but there definitely was one that was happening. Another interesting connection about William Barr with Epstein is he was the head of the DOJ when Epstein committed suicide, or when he died, allegedly. And what's interesting is he personally oversaw the investigation into Jeffrey Epstein's death. And we all know that there's a lot of questions regarding one of the most high-profile suicides in American history, in the jail system or prison system, and that investigation was not handled super well. Let's just be honest, it wasn't super transparent. We see that he was surprised at the death. He makes a statement which we have on the DOJ's website. This was on August 10th, 2019. I was appalled to learn that Jeffrey Epstein was found dead early this morning in an apparent suicide while in federal custody. Mr. Epstein's death raises serious questions that must be answered. In addition to the FBI's investigation, I have consulted with the Inspector General, who is opening an investigation into the circumstances of Epstein's death. So we have evidence that he was personally going to look into Epstein's death and oversee that investigation. He also appointed a new U.S. prisons director after Epstein's death. So he did remove the one that was there at that time and appointed a new person, which I always think is really interesting when we have the changing of the guard, so to say. But we have an article here on CNBC. Attorney General Barr orders removal of acting U.S. prisons director after Epstein's death. And you can look through that. So a few different connections to William Barr, not only his father, but him being listed in the Epstein emails with derogatory information, and then also being in charge of the DOJ and overseeing the entire investigation of Epstein's death, which we still know there's so many questions around. So just a few little connections there. But let's get back to the timeline. So we have Jeffrey Epstein being hired by Donald Barr at the Dalton School. Eventually, he was let go for poor performance. There were rumblings that he did have inappropriate interaction with the girls there, but not necessarily like sexual abuse. There was just some different comments made about his inappropriate behavior or misconduct as far as maybe flirting or acting unprofessionally with students. We have that here in the Pulse article. It says, but other students, including Millicent Young, a graduate of the school in 1976 class, saw things differently. She never had Epstein as a teacher, but the school was small enough that she would spend time around him. She recalled observing Epstein flirting with girls at the school, which drew her attention because it was so different from how the other teachers behaved. There was a real clarity of inappropriateness of behavior. That isn't how male adult teachers conduct themselves, Young said. Spicer, the fellow student who had graduated the same year, said he had clear recollection of disliking Epstein because he was spending so much time with girls at the school. So after Jeffrey Epstein left the Dalton School for poor performance without his college degree, he was hired by Bear Stearns, which is really interesting. So Bear Stearns was an American investment firm. They had different securities, acquisitions, like a ton of different clients and information, a large investment firm, if you will. Epstein starts with them in 1978, and just 4 years he was on the trading floor, and then all of a sudden he was moved up to a major partner. So he really found his niche at Bear Stearns. He left between the years of 1981 and 1989. I couldn't nail down the exact time, but he did leave there due to breaking some violations. He did have to pay some fines because he did break some different laws, specifically trading laws. But don't worry, Jeffrey Epstein still continues to do really well for himself. In 1989, he ends up partnering with a gentleman named Stephen Jude Hoffenberg, and he was a part of the Towers Financial Corporation. And this was a debt collection agency that worked with Epstein at one point said he was like a bounty hunter for people who owed debt. So he would like track people down and get them to pay their debts. However, the Towers Corporation wasn't exactly what it seemed. It was later discovered to be a Ponzi scheme that Hoffenberg was sentenced to 20 years in prison. He served 18 years, plus a $1 million fine and $463 million in institutions. The U.S. Set considered Hoffenberg's financial crimes to be one of the largest Ponzi schemes in history, and Mr. Hoffenberg pled guilty in 1997. Jeffrey Epstein was not criminally charged or held accountable for any of the Ponzi scheme going on in the Towers Corporation. After all of his work experience and business ventures, Epstein decided to start his own company called J. Epstein and Company. Here he wanted to help manage money and assets for the true wealthy people, the 1%, the billionaires. So he was specifically looking for clients who were worth around $1 billion. And here we have enter Leslie Wexner, or Les Wexner. You might be familiar with that name because it's been all over the news lately, as he just recently gave testimony before Congress in regards to his connection to Jeffrey Epstein. Whitney Webb does a lot of reporting on Les Wexner. If you'd like to research him more specifically, we're gonna just scratch the surface today. So Les Wexner hired Jeffrey Epstein. Jeffrey Epstein helped him with his personal finances. He oversaw his properties. He actually ended up purchasing a plane from Wexner. He ended up purchasing an apartment from Wexner. They had a very close relationship. If you do watch the hearing with Les Wexner, Les is trying to say that they were not personal friends, but it seems like the Congress was really trying to push him on that.
So I will just ask you one final question before we take a break. With the benefit of hindsight, were there any things you witnessed or observed about Mr. Epstein that could have suggested he was trafficking and sexually abusing women?
Absolutely not. I've asked myself that question over and over, why I didn't see there should have been a clue or something that I should have picked up on. There's nothing that I can recall, nothing, not even a clue of a clue. And I think the reason, in hindsight, and I think for the understanding to get to the bottom of what Jeffrey did, is to understand how great a con he was, because that's the explanation I have to myself. How could I have never thought he was a thief? How could I have never thought he was a pervert? All the terrible things. Never a clue.
You would think they were personal friends with the type of communication that they had. Later, Lex claims that they parted ways due to Epstein stealing from him, but you can definitely dive more into that. But here we have in the timeline Wexner and Epstein partnering up, and Epstein helping manage Wexner's finances. You've probably seen this viral clip going around from Wexner's hearing from his lawyer.
It was just regularly done.
Answer not the question. 5 words, okay?
Answer the question.
Okay.
A discrete question.
So let's talk a little bit about Les Wexner, because he may have impacted your life if you're a millennial without you even realizing it. He's worth roughly around $9 billion is what I could find on the internet. Yes, $9 billion. If you're familiar with the amazingness of like cucumber melon from Bath and Body Works, or if you were one that got one of those lacy tank tops from American Eagle, or if you liked the Abercrombie and Fitch style, you definitely were influenced by Les Wexner. He started the Limited brands, which I think hyper-sexualized our teenage culture as millennials. He also started Victoria's Secret as well, and was presenting it as one of the most premier lingerie companies in the US. He also founded Limited 2. If you remember going to Limited 2, as I do as a millennial, I got my sparkly jeans for my back to school outfit. So as a millennial, Les Wexner, unfortunately, probably did have an impact on your life through one of his brands. He also had Express. I mean, you could research it. He had so many different stores. And again, I think a lot of these stores were the beginning of the sexualization of teenagers, especially in regards to Victoria's Secret selling thongs to children, basically 15, 16, 17-year-olds. And then also marketing like Abercrombie and Fitch, and I would even say American Eagle, in a more salacious way in regards to teenagers. So definitely something to think about as an interesting marketing choices for brands for teenage kids. If you're a millennial, you'll know what I'm talking about. But in regards to thanking Wexner for Love Spell perfume and again cucumber melon, we can also talk about his foundation. So we have the Wexner Foundation, which is really interesting. If you go right to his website, it's straight up what they want to do. It says it right on the front page: strengthening leadership in the North American Jewish communities and the state of Israel. So the idea of this foundation is to create great relations with Jewish people in communities. If you scroll down a little bit, you'll see we have leadership initiatives for Israelis, developing outstanding leaders for the public service in Israel. We also have, if you look up here, volunteers educating and inspiring exceptional leaders in North American Jewish communities, training emerging and current professionals to exercise leadership in North American Jewish communities. So specifically, the Wexner Foundation focuses on investing in Jewish communities in North America and educating them and connecting them with Israel and the pride, I would say, in the Jewish culture as being a Jewish leader. So a lot of emphasis on investing in the Jewish cultures, customs, and Israelis, which I think is interesting because Wexner is Russian and Jewish. He doesn't seem to be too concerned with connecting Russians with American leadership, but he does seem concerned with connecting Jewish people with American leadership. That seems to be his focus, not so much on growing Americans or just America. It seems that he seems very focused on one specific entity in regards to growing them throughout the American culture. Whitney Webb did a little bit of reporting on him, so I'm going to go ahead and just put the video in here and you can hear what she has to say.
Wexner is interested in, by his own admission, according to this New York Magazine interview that he gave in the 1980s, is accumulating more and more power and control. And the reason he says that in that article, it's so crazy you have to go and read it, is because he considers himself demonically possessed by what he calls a debuk, which is the Yiddish term for a demonic possession. And he says he had it when he was a child, it left when he was a teen, and then when he was 40, it returned to him and makes him want to accumulate more and more power and become more and more powerful and grow his business. So, you know, given everything we know, that's just the icing on the cake, as it were.
So let's go ahead and take a look at that news article, a little bit of an interesting topic. It's from I think she said the New York Magazine. I have it here and we can go ahead and look it up. On the morning Leslie Wexner became a billionaire, he woke up worried. But this was not unusual. He always wakes up worried because of his debek, which pokes and prods and gives him some itchiness of the soul, which he calls spikes? I don't know how to say that. Sometimes he runs away from it on the roads of Columbus, or drives away in one of his Porsches, or flees from it on one of his planes, but then it's back with his first coffee, his first meeting, nudging him. Okay, so it seems like it's chasing him, like he wants to get away from it, but it's just part of his day-to-day routine, like as routine as a cup of coffee. We also have in the article, it says, and now perhaps it is the time to reinduce Leslie Wexner's debek, the demon that always wakes up in the morning with Wexner and tweaks and pulls at him. When he was a boy, his father called it chummel, a churning. So he feels molten and uninformed, pricked by these spiritual pines and needles. He met the demon again when he was 40, already worth $500 million, when he climbed the mountain in front of his house, Vale, and almost froze to death and decided to change his life. This demon he calls terminal spikes, which makes him wander from house to house, repeating the pattern of his childhood in a luxurious scale, wanting more, swallowing larger companies than his own. It is precisely the reason that Wexner has $1 billion and didn't stop at, say, $5 million, and a new Mercedes every year that he calls a normal life, bridge on Wednesday and bar mitzvahs on Saturday, at the Winding Hollow Country Club in Columbus, which it seemed like Buckingham Palace to him when he was 15. So here we have this debek as part of his motivation for wanting more and being so ambitious. And then we'll continue. It's also found here on page 35. Not only was it cheaper to buy than build, to take over favorable leases than acquire new ones to install his own management team, but there was also the debek saying, more, what's next? He went too fast and got into trouble in 1979, so he turned over his operations to Murawski and did not buy anything himself. So we see that this debek is just having cravings, wanting more, wanting to continue to build and buy and be successful. And then the last mention of it in the article here, it says, but if everyone was to throw his bundle into the ring with all the others, he'd go back and pick up the very same bundle again. Les would pick up his debek, his splicks, because it's part of his genius. So it's a part of his success. This demon created part of his success. So just an interesting thought that he is very open about the fact that he has a demon guiding him. So let's get back to Jeffrey Epstein. What does he do after getting fired by Les Wexner? Well, in order to answer that question, we do have to talk about his partner in crime, Ghislaine Maxwell, which I know everyone has probably heard about at this point. Before we can talk about Ghislaine, we do need to talk about her father, Robert Maxwell, who was really, really interesting. So we're going to just kind of zoom out a little bit. I really enjoyed researching him because he has a true rags to riches story and a lot of questions in between. So he first fled from the Nazis. That was his beginning, being a Jewish refugee. And then from there, he also received a very large military award for his bravery. From there, he continued to become a British socialite. He also changed his name about 6 different times that we know about. He went through 6 different names or 6 different aliases in his lifetime. He also had a very suspicious death, which led people to come to the conclusion that he was a spy. The question just is for who. He also sold bugged software to several different countries. It is alleged that Maxwell distributed bugged software to a plethora of national governments, global financial institutions, and 2 of the most important nuclear research and national security facilities in the United States. This enabled mass spying by the government of Israel. The Foreign Office suspected Maxwell of being a secret agent of a foreign government, possibly a double agent or even a triple agent, and had thoroughly bad character, almost certainly financed by Russia. He also had known links to British Secret Intelligence Service, M16, to the Soviet Union, the KGB, and also to Israeli International Service, or Mossad. So there's a lot of questions as to who was he actually working for and where did his money actually come from. Also, shortly before Maxwell's death, there was an employee from the Israel military organization that did say Maxwell was an agent of Mossad, and you can look up that news article too. It's very interesting.
Jeffrey Epstein is dead. Now, Ghislaine Maxwell, there are reports she's in Paris. You maintain that it was your employer, Robert Maxwell, owner of the Daily Mirror. You say that he was an Israeli agent, and as was his daughter.
He was not my employer. I would like to correct that.
Okay.
We worked together with him.
And you say that his daughter Ghislaine also, though, worked for Israel, and it was Robert Maxwell who introduced Jeffrey Epstein to Ghislaine Maxwell way before the 1990s, as mainstream media is reporting.
Correct. Mr. Epstein was introduced to Ms. Maxwell probably sometime in the 80s. And Mr. Maxwell also thought he might be introducing a fellow to date his daughter. He tried to do a favor to his daughter, to find her a shidduch, as they say in Hebrew, a match.
Okay, and that didn't really quite work out. I suppose what the most alarming allegations that you've been making are that the entire Epstein operation was a honey trap operation to entrap politicians, policymakers, celebrities, people in the media eye, basically to become Israel's assets.
Correct. That it became basically an intelligence operation to entrap different politicians around the world.
So while Robert Maxwell's true occupation is up for debate, he did have, it is proven, a real rags to riches story. He became a British socialite. He ended up buying a press called Pergamon Press that helped create specifically US textbooks, which is interesting. This publisher was used for scientific, technical, and medical books and journals, including encyclopedias, and also published the works of the Club of Rome. The Paramount Press was influential in scientific content to the US academic and research institutions, often through library subscriptions. So I do want to pause and say here, we have a potential triple agent spy purchasing a publishing house, choosing as far as encyclopedias, scientific materials, US academic materials, what is going to get published in those materials that's going to be circulated as facts into the general public and the US population. It's just an interesting thing to point out that someone who could potentially have either Russia, Israel, or British ties actually got to choose what was published in those materials. And in between 1951 and I think it's 1999, it was known as the Paramount phenomenon, which means they just went and published a ton of different scientific materials and all different materials, and a lot of them were sent over to the US in academic books. If they had a certain narrative that they were told to publish or get out to the public, having a printing press would have been a really successful way to do that. It's almost like now we have so much on social media, there's so much propaganda, there's so much warfare, psychological warfare going on social media. It's much easier to infiltrate a culture or a country now through social media. You'd want to be able to infiltrate through the educational system, so what better way to do that back in the 1950s, 1990s, was controlling what was published. Just a thought. So in 1989, he did have to sell the printing press to cover some of his debts, is what was reported. And then we have going on to his very mysterious death. In 1991, Robert Maxwell was found dead. There was a lot of questions regarding his death, his mysterious death, what actually happened. I don't know if anyone really knows. The story goes he was on his yacht. He went up to relieve himself in the middle of the night. He was completely undressed and he ended up having a heart attack, fell over and died from the heart attack and was found floating in the ocean. A lot of other people have, a lot of conspiracy theorists, I guess, would say that there was more to the story, that it could have been Israeli intelligence, he could have owned mafia money, it could have been the British intelligence, or it could have been Russia, the KGB. If he was a true triple agent, maybe they didn't know he was working for them, or it could have been a suicide. Some people say as well he could have committed suicide because he was in so much debt at that time. Although it seems that his family did just fine after he had passed away, so I'm not sure how much debt he actually was in. But there's a lot of questions. Was it a suicide? Was it a murder? Was it just a heart attack? And he was found naked, floating in the ocean. So now let's talk about Ghislaine Maxwell. It's been reported that Ghislaine and Epstein started dating around 1991, maybe 1992. And in that time frame, she had moved to New York after her father's death, and they had met and began their romantic relationship. Now, it's been reported that their romantic relationship ended in the late 90s, but they continued to be very close friends, even citing a Vanity Fair article in 2003 when Jeffrey Epstein was talking about Ghislaine and said that she was his best friend. But it had been reported that the romantic portion of their relationship had ended and that they were just very close, I guess, business associates, friends later on in life, but that their romantic relationship had ended in the late 90s. Now, I do want to pause and talk about Ghislaine really quick because I know we heard about how she was arrested a few years ago and she's been put behind bars, and it was presented to us in a way that there was some sort of justice for these victims, some sort of restitution for this wrongdoing. But let's take a look at where she is and what type of prison experience that Ghislaine is having.
Fellow inmates are claiming that Jeffrey Epstein's former girlfriend, Ghislaine Maxwell, is getting special treatment behind bars. This comes as the feds release 3 million pages from the Epstein files.
Is Jeffrey Epstein's former girlfriend getting special treatment behind bars? There's growing outrage over reported perks being handed to Ghislaine Maxwell, now serving 20 years for child sex trafficking.
Does it sound like she's getting special treatment to you?
I know for a fact she's getting special treatment.
Les Trent spoke to Sam Mangle, a prison consultant who has 3 clients at the same facility as Maxwell, the Bryan Federal Prison Camp in Texas.
Whether it's access to a laptop computer, which is unheard of, to visits where they lock down the camp and no one can leave their bunks while she's having visitors.
Allegations of other perks, according to the New York Times, include meals being delivered to her cell and being served bottled water while other inmates drink tap water, playing with service dogs, showering alone, and watching TV alone in staff-only areas. They even provided her with an umbrella to shade her from the hot Texas sun while she took her daily walks.
She's been given the freedom and liberties that the other inmates do not have.
Last July, Maxwell was moved from a medium security prison in Florida to the minimum security camp in Texas. This followed her meeting with Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche. According to reports, fellow inmates at the facility were threatened with solitary confinement or transferred to a tougher penitentiary if they voiced complaints about Maxwell's perks.
They've been told from the day she got there, do not discuss her, do not put anything in writing, do not talk about her on the phone, do not make any trouble regarding Miss Maxwell, or we will move you to another location.
Now, this is not where she originally was. She was moved to this facility, and it had been reported that it was in the dead of night, not on a bus, anything like that. It was in a vehicle where she was transported to this camp. It's referred to as the Federal Prison Camp Bryan. And this camp is very interesting. It's also known as the nickname as Club Fed. And the situation, you can see it looks more like a camp situation. It's not really like a prison cell situation. I do want to say too, in the Epstein files that were released, the original location of Ghislaine, where she was, Epstein, somehow in these emails, I don't know how, and I didn't look too much into it, I just know it's in there, I'll show it to you. There was footage of Ghislaine in her cell, which I think is really interesting. How could Epstein get access to the camera footage of her cell as she was in prison? How do you have the connections to get that? Is that even allowed? I don't think it is. So that's kind of interesting that footage was in there. So again, this was the first place she was at. This is not the Camp Brian situation. This was the first prison. So I'll show you that video. Well, just a portion of it here. So very interesting. So we have Ghislaine entering the scene early 1990s. They dated for about, it seems like maybe 10 years. Their romantic relationship ended, and then they just became business associates for or business or friends or best friends for about 20 years. And we know that she has been wrapped into all of these different sexual allegations and recruiting women, etc., for Epstein. So now let's talk about Epstein's convictions. Jeffrey Epstein's first conviction happened in 2008, where he pled guilty for 2 charges. One was soliciting a prostitute. The second was soliciting prostitution for a minor. He did plead guilty. This was really interesting, and this is where I think things started to really bubble up, because I think people thought that things would be brought much more to light back in 2008 when these convictions started happening. But he did enter a plea deal, which a lot of people refer to as a sweetheart deal. And I'm just gonna put a little clip in here from the Conscious Resistance Network. He has a really good Epstein documentary. I think it's like 45 minutes or an hour that he made a long time ago. So it doesn't have any of the new information, but it scratches the surface on what was going on in regards to Epstein back in 2008 and his conviction. So let's look at the deal that he was given for soliciting prostitution of a minor.
Despite all of these statements from more than 40 women and evidence gathered from Epstein's home, the billionaire would escape with barely a scratch. In May 2006, the Palm Beach police filed a probable cause affidavit for 4 counts of unlawful sexual activity with a minor. However, by the end of the summer, the federal government would offer Epstein a non-prosecution agreement, and he would be allowed to plead guilty to a single charge of felony solicitation of prostitution. The police chief, Michael Ryder, accused the state attorney of bending over backward for a rich man and then turned the matter over to the FBI. As part of this non-prosecution agreement, Epstein was ordered to pay multi-million-dollar settlements to victims and sentenced to 18 months of jail, of which he only served 13.
Federal prosecutors are now answering to allegations they let convicted pedophile Jeffrey Epstein off the hook in 2008. In 2007, before Epstein's trial, which landed him in jail for 13 months, the billionaire was let off the hook for federal charges. The deal has been referred to as a sweetheart deal. The deal may have violated the Crime Victims' Rights Act. For more on this tonight, we turn to Mike Papantonio, host of America's Lawyer.
This was a sweetheart deal that was done secretly. I mean, the only way to describe this is it was a secret deal done by the federal government, by the federal prosecutors. U.S. Attorney Marie Filifano actually engaged in the deal. And with that deal, she gave a sentence that ordinarily would have landed most people in prison for life. The sentence was a non-prosecution where Epstein went to jail for 13 months. And here's the real sticker. He didn't really go to jail. He was allowed to go free 16 hours a day, 6 days a week. So basically, the deal was he got to sleep in a prison cell at night. This was Epstein, and he was a multi-billionaire who had if you look down, his list of who I know, it is the who's who around the world. And so all of a sudden, he gets this free pass.
Epstein was allowed to stay in the Palm Beach County Jail in his own private cell, where he was allowed to leave 6 days a week for 16 hours a day for work release. Epstein was forced to register as a sex offender for life, but with his money and his connections, he doesn't seem too bothered.
I think it's important to note that this sweetheart deal came from the federal government itself. It came from the powers at be. And I don't know, it's just an interesting point that I want to make sure people understand. It was literally the federal government. We have Lex Acosta. He was the Southern District Attorney for the state of Florida that oversaw the plea deal with Jeffrey Epstein. He used the quote that Jeffrey Epstein was above my pay grade. And also I was told he was intelligent and that I couldn't touch him, because this guy ended up having a lot of fire given to him because he was the U.S. attorney at this time in the state of Florida. How could this guy just walk free after these allegations and all the evidence? And he testified that he was told that Epstein was above his pay grade and he could not touch him. So just an interesting thought there as well. But that was the beginning of Jeffrey Epstein's convictions. So we're gonna fast forward now to 2019. The Southern District Court of New York convicts Jeffrey Epstein of sex trafficking of minors, and he is put behind bars. So that's when the story really started to explode a little bit. But I will say, before 2019, rumblings of this story began to bubble, specifically in regards to Donald Trump. When he started running back 2015, 2016, he started bringing up the idea of the island, Prince Andrews, and made quite outlandish allegations, or at least implicated certain allegations in regards to Jeffrey Epstein and his connections. So let's all recall what Trump was saying back when he started to run.
You raised the question of Jeffrey Epstein in your remarks about in the Q&A.
Well, I think he's got a problem. I mean,
what do you think the problem will be?
I don't know, but that island was really a cesspool. There's no question about it. Just ask Prince Andrew. He'll tell you about it. The island was an absolute cesspool. So,
the Clintons are friends
and he's
of
been
yours,
there
right?
for many times.
The Clintons are friends.
Well, I can't say friends, but I know
You're friendly. You know them.
They play at my clubs a lot. I have clubs, and everybody likes to play at my clubs.
Are you saying there's a political problem for her if she runs for president?
It could be a political problem. Look, he could be a political problem. Right now, he's Teflon, and right now, maybe not. But he could end up being a political problem.
I also want to note that Cindy McCain came out after Jeffrey Epstein was arrested in 2019 and basically told us that we all knew what Epstein was doing. We all knew what he was up to.
It hides in plain sight. Epstein was hiding in plain sight. We all knew about him. We all knew what he was doing, but we had no one that was legal aspect that would go after him. They were afraid of him. For whatever reason, they were afraid of him.
Then Jeffrey Epstein committed suicide, which we'll talk about in a minute. But fast forward to our media today, back in February of last year, Trump's administration, who is the most transparent administration in U.S. history, had their influencers come out with the Epstein binders. I don't know if you remember that, but they were excited, holding and smiling with these Epstein binders. Now, I do want to say the Trump administration started this idea of having new press in the press room, which the press briefing, which I think is a great idea initially. I think there should be a lot more independent journalists or citizen journalists who are able to ask questions to our administration. This was last year in January, and more than 7,400 influencers applied for White House press credentials. And the Trump administration hired some specific influencers to help Gen Z be, I think, a little more interested in politics, I guess. But I also think it's probably because they're going to ask more pro-Trump administration questions, but that's neither here nor there. That's not what we're talking about today. But here, I just want to say these influencers, these MAGA right-wing influencers who are privy to the press information, have press credentials, who could ask these people very good questions and hold their feet to the fire, are posing with these little Epstein binders, smiling that they got the documentation. And I just want to say, as we're looking through just what was released right now, there is extremely disturbing information in these emails and documents. And if you were handed a binder to actually, if you were a press person starting to dig in and look through these binders, I don't know if you could hold them smiling and clapping and being excited that you have this really disheartening and disgusting information. And if you truly realize what this meant for our country and our society, I think you'd be a little more disturbed and feel like I need to go ahead and scour through this and share as much as I can with the American people and the public, not just stand there smiling with your little binder. But that's neither here nor there. I'm not in their position, so I can't say why they did what they did, but I can say the Trump administration did in February of 2025 give these little people their binders and hoped that the American people would be excited enough to look at what was in those. Well, when those were released, it was a lot of repeat information. It really wasn't new. People who had been following the story, independent journalists and the citizen journalists who really had been diving into this whole story and situation, started calling their bluff and said, hey, this is not new information. We want to get the new information in regards to the Epstein files. So then the backlash started happening.
There's a lot of intrigue surrounding the release of the Epstein files, Martin Luther King files, John F. Kennedy files. Some current and former FBI agents are saying, some of them telling me, that they feel the FBI establishment came out ahead in the standoff sort of with the New York FBI field office over releasing the records, and your Attorney General Pam Bondy demanding them but not getting all that she wanted. Is that process still on track? I think that's one of the most often questions I've been asked the last couple of days, to release these records on Epstein, MLK, and JFK.
Well, Pam Bondy's done a phenomenal job in every respect, and there could have been some holdback. I haven't heard too much about it, but they could. But the bottom line is the records are getting out. The Kennedy records are getting out. Those are the ones I really wanted to see the most, with the Kennedys. And during my administration, as you know, I released a lot of them, but then a lot of people started coming in, people that I respected, people that worked for the administration, asked me not to release the rest. And I respected that. They gave me certain reasons, but I respected that. And I did say, I must tell you, I said that probably wish I did release the whole thing, because I have no idea what's in there. But since then they found, and we found, 2,000 more documents on Kennedy.
The MAGA base got pretty frustrated because Trump said he would release the Epstein files, and it's something that he was talking about at the beginning of his run back in 2015, 2016. There was a lot of rumblings. I don't know if you follow QAnon, but also QAnon and the Q board about sex trafficking and minors and the island and all these things. Trump brought it up several times when he was running, making people think that there would be true justice for the sex traffickers in this story and situation. But basically, as the base was pushing him, saying, hey, we're really unhappy that you haven't released the rest of the Epstein files, the base was basically told to shut up. So we have a post on Truth Social from Donald Trump. This was posted on July 16th, 2025. It's very long, but it says, the radical left Democrats have hit pay dirt again, just like they did with the fake and discredited Steele dossier, the lying 51 intelligent agents, the laptop from hell, which the Dems swore had come from Russia, and even Russia scam itself is totally fake and a made-up story in order to hide crooked Hillary Clinton's big loss in the 2016 presidential election. These scams and hoaxes are all the Democrats are good at. It's all they have. They have no good governing, no good at policy, and no good at picking winning candidates. Also, unlike Republicans, they stick together like glue. Their new scam is what we will call forever the Jeffrey Epstein hoax. And my past supporters have bought into this bullshit hook, line, and sinker. They haven't learned their lesson and probably never will, even after being conned by the lunatic left for 8 long years. I have had more success in 6 months than perhaps any president in our country's history, and all those people want to talk about with strong prodding by the fake news and the success-starved Dems is the Jeffrey Epstein hoax. Let those weaklings continue forward to do the Democrats' work, and don't even think about talking of our incredible and unprecedented success, because I don't want their support anymore. Thank you for your attention to this matter. Make America great again. Okay, so in July of 2025, not even a year ago, Trump is pushing out that the Jeffrey Epstein story was a hoax. Again, going back to what he brought it up himself back in 2015, 2016, and many other times in between. And this is where I talk a little bit in my last episode about the right-left narrative, friends. This information is being used to continue to polarize us between the right and the left, to continue to create division so we as American people won't rally together. We're too busy fighting with ourselves to hold the government and these people who were involved in the Epstein files accountable. But I will get off my soapbox there because we'll continue on the timeline. So we have Trump basically saying it's a big fat hoax. This reminded me of Kash Patel. So Kash Patel, who is the FBI director currently overseeing a lot of different things, which we won't get into. But back in 2023, this is what he had to say about the Epstein files and the Little Black Book.
So who has Jeffrey Epstein's
Black Book?
Black Book.
FBI.
But who? That is, I mean, there's...
that's under direct control of the director of the FBI. Just like the manifesto from the Nashville school shooting of the Catholic school. We still haven't seen that, right? It's not the Nashville police or PD saying we don't want this out. The FBI airmailed into that operation and said this is not getting out. Because they do that because this is another government gangster operation. All these local law enforcement communities get funding from the DOJ and FBI for local programs. And if you don't cooperate, you're not getting your $1 million for this, and you're not getting and that's a lot of money to these local districts. That's how they play the game. That's why you don't have a black book. Or the
but the black book, it's not just sitting. I mean, that's Hoover power times 10.
And to me, that's a thing I think President Trump should run on. On day one, roll out the black book. And not just that. On day one, roll out all of the text messaging communications we were told were deleted. On day one, play the rest of the video of the pipe bomber. On day, one of the reforms I talk about in government gangsters is you need a central node to be continuously declassifying. This is another thing they do. They overclassify. And I'm telling you, as a former number 2 in the IC, they overclassify 50% of the stuff there to protect the deep state. Oh, no, you can't see that. Nothing to see here. Gina was a master at it, of doing it. And we still haven't seen half of the Russiagate report that we wrote. Still under lock and key. On how the ICA was originally constructed. We put 10,000 man-hours against John Brennan's team that did it. And we found out why they came up with their bogus conclusion. But we couldn't sell it to the world because we couldn't talk about it, and the government gangsters came in and buried it. All of these things, there needs to be a continuing central power, whether it's the White House or offsite, that says every request that comes in, just right out the door, as long as it's not a major threat to national security.
Now, fast forward to September 2025, Kash Patel is saying that there's no evidence that Jeffrey Epstein was trafficking minors or women to anyone but himself.
Who, if anyone, did Epstein traffic these young women to besides himself?
Himself. There is no credible information. None. If there were, I would bring the case yesterday that he trafficked to other individuals. And the information we have, again, is limited.
So the answer is no one?
For the information that we have.
In the files?
In the case file.
Also, during all this Epstein backlash, we had the video that was released for the cell where Jeffrey Epstein supposedly killed himself, that the most transparent administration in history was going to release the full video to us. So they did release the video with 1 minute of footage missing, which again caused outrage and backlash from the MAGA base or Trump supporters, or really a lot of just Americans in general, because how is it missing an hour?
There was a minute that was off the counter, and what we learned from Bureau of Prisons was every night, they redo that video. It's old, from like 1999. So every night the video is reset, and every night should have the same minute missing.
But we were supposed to just be satisfied that we had the full video. Also, I'm gonna say too, that was not the direct door to his cell. It looks to me like that was down to a hall of cells. So I'm not sure even how much that was even gonna show us anyways. But from there, I'm just gonna say that there was a lot of backlash in regards to this video missing an hour. Let's also pause here and talk about Jeffrey Epstein's death just really quick. So they said, first it was reported that the guards were sleeping when Jeffrey Epstein killed himself. Then it was reported that the 2 workers falsified documents. They said that they were doing their checks and they actually weren't. Well, when this was brought up in court, they actually didn't receive really convictions. Instead, they were told that they would be subjected to supervised release, and they would be required to complete 100 hours of community service, and they would be required to fully cooperate with an ongoing probe by the Justice Department Inspector General. Remember, William Barr was in charge of the DOJ at this time, overseeing everything that was happening with the Jeffrey Epstein suicide investigation. We also have that back in 2019, ABC News anchor Amy Robach, I don't know how to say her name, but she had it very clear that they had this information well before it was released to the public. Again, this was in 2019. She was caught on a hot mic saying this.
For 3 years, I've had this interview with Virginia Roberts. We would not put it on the air. First of all, I was told, who's Jeffrey Epstein? No one knows who that is. This is a stupid story. Then the palace found out that we had her whole allegations about Prince Andrew and threatened us a million different ways. We were so afraid we wouldn't be able to interview Kate and Will that also quashed the story. And then Alan Dershowitz was also implicated in it because of the planes. She told me everything. She had pictures. She had everything. She was in hiding for 12 years. We convinced her to come out. We convinced her to talk to us. It was unbelievable what we had. Clinton, we had everything. I tried for 3 years to get it on, to no avail, and now it's all coming out, and it's like these new revelations, and I freaking had all of it. I'm so pissed right now. Like, every day I get more and more pissed because I'm just like, oh my God, what we had was unreal. Other women backing it up. Hey, yep. Brad Edwards, the attorney, 3 years ago, saying there will come a day when we will realize Jeffrey Epstein was the most prolific pedophile this country has ever known. I had it all 3 years ago.
There has been rumblings of Jeffrey Epstein and what had been going on with him for years, even going back to what Mrs. McCain said, that they were all aware of what was going on. We have Donald Trump in 2015 saying they were aware of what was going on. Then we have us being told that it's a hoax, that it's not even real, that if you're falling for it, it's bullshit and you're basically an idiot. And then now here we are today. I think it was 3 million documents are released and 3 more million documents are going to be released. And on top of that, like the news anchor just said, we have victims who have come forward and said that they were victims of Jeffrey Epstein and several extremely powerful, rich, wealthy people as well. And one of the victims that I want to talk about is Virginia Roberts, or Virginia Giuffre, I think is how you say her name. She was one of the most prominent people that came forward against Jeffrey Epstein, and specifically Prince Andrew. She was in a picture with Prince Andrews, and I think she was like 15 at the time. But she came forward and was very vocal about the abuse that she experienced. What's interesting about Virginia Giuffre is that in March of 2025, so she had come forward about, she'd done a ton of media blitz, a lot of stuff trying to get the Epstein files out. And in March of 2025, she took to Instagram and posted that she has started to suffer from kidney failure and that her car had collided with a school bus. This was in Australia. And she stated specifically that she was given 4 days to live and that she was being transferred to a specialist hospital. This story created a lot of different questions about what had really happened to her and what was going on, and was this some sort of hit? Was it just an accident? What really was this story? In April of 2025, Virginia was reported to have died from committing suicide. And it's just interesting that all of this stuff is coming out now after she had worked so hard and doing her interviews. And there's a lot of questions about this and allegations around it and its conspiracies around it. So I just wanted to point that out, that she was one of the prominent victims, and she is no longer here to see all of this stuff come out and continue to fight the fight on getting justice for herself and for the other victims and individuals. There's been quite a few victims that have come forward. You could go to EpsteinJustice.com with Nick Bryant, and he has worked with a lot of the victims. So that's something else I want to say. The media is making it look like there was no one else involved, but there's a lot of victims who have come forward. And specifically, there was something developed called the Jeffrey Epstein's Victims Compensation Program. It was established in June of 2020. It was created to provide financial compensation to the survivors of Jeffrey Epstein's abuse without requiring them to go through the court system. In total, 225 women sued, 150 settlements were awarded. 12 of the women declined and said that they would not take the settlement because it required them to sign an NDA. So basically, the Jeffrey Epstein Victims Compensation Program was created. for victims, but if you wanted the money, you couldn't speak about what had happened to you. So you either got your restitution through finances, or you were free to speak about what had happened and try to bring justice to the situation. You may have heard that there's allegations of Jeffrey Epstein being some sort of intelligence officer.
Do you think there's any intel community involvement in this?
I wouldn't be surprised one bit. I am convinced, based on my own sources and my own reporting on this story, he wasn't one of ours.
So he was an American, which leads basically three options: MI6, Saudi, or Mossad.
Yep.
Which one would you choose?
I guess Mossad, given his connection to Ghislaine Maxwell.
So what does that mean?
Well, I mean, it's possible that that's the reason everything's getting buried, that there is some treasure trove, and it's getting buried because...
How many people here believe that? Raise your hand. Okay, I'd say about half the hands think that it's being buried because of an Israeli thing.
It could be. I really don't know.
And I have no evidence to suggest that.
No, me neither. I did think it was very odd how, look, half of you raised your hands because you've heard that theory, you've heard it debated, you have questions, but the one time Pam Bondy was asked a question about this at the cabinet meeting on Monday, she was like, and as for whether he was an agent, that I don't know. I haven't looked into that. I'll get back to you. You haven't looked into it? What do you mean? So that was kind of a fishy answer.
And Megan, remember, Alexander Acosta in 2007, he said he was told to treat Epstein carefully because he was an intel asset. That was one of Trump's cabinet secretaries who was literally a U.S. attorney 3 hours from here in Florida. He said that himself.
And I think that there is a lot of merit to this concern. One of which was, if he was an intelligence officer, his main job was to do some sort of honeypot scheme, get leaders, business people, etc., in very compromising situations, record it on film and have that available to blackmail them and perhaps be able to control them from a foreign government to influence American politics. And if that's something that was going on, that our government should be extremely concerned if Jeffrey Epstein was an agent of a foreign country blackmailing our governmental leaders, and then from there influencing our government's policies. That would be something that's a huge red flag, and I don't know why we wouldn't want to research that further, unless perhaps maybe Epstein was working on the American government's behalf. I don't know, but there's a lot of theories out there, and I just want to say there's a lot of merit to these theories.
So what are the connections that you found between Epstein and Israel?
Well, so in the case of people like Ratner and people like Epstein, they're accused of major sex crimes, but they also have major connections to organized crime and or intelligence. You know, the early history of Israel, for example, some of these organized crime-linked oligarchs, the Bronfman family, for example, instrumental in arming the Haganah, the precursor to the IDF. A lot of these mob figures collaborated with Mossad, including Lansky himself. But they have a lot of ties to Israeli intelligence and also to U.S. intelligence. You sort of end up finding, more often than not, that in a lot of the CIA's most controversial activities, they're collaborating with Israeli intelligence, and arguably that's because, you know, they have connections that go even beyond those agencies, because a lot of times when people talk about intelligence-related crimes or covert operations, people forget that intelligence agencies aren't necessarily the power there. They work for somebody else. You know, the CIA and its precursor, the OSS, were dominated by Wall Street bankers, and those bankers teamed up with organized crime. It was a mutually beneficial relationship, and the CIA ended up taking over a lot of rackets from the mob, like drug trafficking, because, you know, the mob then, by teaming up with the CIA, gets state protection. A lot of people that were used in assassination efforts backed by the CIA hired mobsters from the U.S. to do that. You know, most of the CIA's regime change coups were done on behalf of U.S. multinational corporations and because of, you know, oligarch moneyed interests. As far as, you know, since you asked about Epstein and the Israeli state, he's really alleged to have been working more closely with Israeli military intelligence, not necessarily Mossad.
We also have connections now today being reported in 2026 with the new release of the emails. You'll see the media is really starting to push, just beginning, that Jeffrey Epstein was a spy of the KGB. And then we also have other people saying Jeffrey Epstein could have been somehow connected with China. media. But I do want to say, you'll see here that I'm going to put a video in. Pam Bondy is specifically asked if Jeffrey Epstein could have been an intelligence officer or work on behalf of another country in regards to being a spy. And you'll see that Donald Trump does jump in pretty quickly to interrupt Pam Bondy's answer to the question.
Allegedly said that he did work for an intelligence agency. So could you resolve whether or not he did? And also, could you say why there was a minute missing from the jailhouse tape on the night of the stabbing?
Yeah, sure. If I
Pam, could I just interrupt for
Sure.
1 second? Are you still talking about Jeffrey Epstein? This guy's been talked about for years. You're asking, we have Texas, we have this, we have all of the things. And are people still talking about this guy, this creep? That is unbelievable. Do you want to waste the time, and do you feel like answering?
I don't mind answering.
I mean, I can't believe you're asking a question on Epstein at a time like this, where we're having some of the greatest success and also tragedy with what happened in Texas. It just seems like a desecration, but you go ahead.
Sure. First, to back up on that, in February, I did an interview on Fox, and it's been getting a lot of attention because I said, I was asked a question about the client list, and my response was, it's sitting on my desk to be reviewed, meaning the file along with the JFK, MLK files as well. That's what I meant by that. Also, to the tens of thousands of video, they turned out to be child porn downloaded by that disgusting Jeffrey Epstein. Child porn is what they were. Never going to be released, never going to see the light of day. To him being an agent, I have no knowledge about that. We can get back to you on that.
And now we have media reporting that he was acting on behalf of the KGB or some sort of foreign intelligence. You would think that if our government made connections, that somebody very powerful and influential was working on behalf of a foreign government, getting blackmailing information on our government leaders so they could influence the way that they did legislation or the way money went or where money went or whatever. You would think that that would be a huge thing that the government would want to research. We shouldn't have any foreign country interfering on our US government decisions, right? So if he was working on behalf of another agency or another government, you would think that our, Kash Patel and Donald Trump would want to look at that, and Pam Bondy would want to look at that extremely thoroughly. But it seems that it's something that they're just not worried about, and they don't think was happening, I guess, from what I can tell. James Corbett is someone who I've been following for a while. I showed him on the Epstein Files Beyond the Right and Left. And here is something that he published that I want to put in here. He's been following this story for quite a while, so I do like to get information from him because he's building upon his knowledge that he already has. And he did release a video of new things he learned from the Epstein files that were recently dropped. And here he lists out reasoning as to why he may think that Jeffrey Epstein was somehow connected to Mossad or Israeli intelligence. And I think it's something that we need to look at. So he writes here, in addition to many, many ties to Israel, I listed my 10 things I learned from the Epstein Files editorial. More and more data continues to emerge showing how Epstein worked with his pal and ex-Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak to secure contracts and achieve diplomatic objectives for Israel. This data includes the information on how Epstein first, number one, helped Barak sell Israeli-produced Gaza-tested biometric control systems to the Nigerian government. 2, connected Barak and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu with U.S. investors seeking to exploit the Lithuanian natural gas field of West Harafa. 3, greased the skids for the first of an Indian prime minister to Israel and was asked to facilitate contact between the Indian leadership and the Trump administration insiders like Jared Kushner and Steve Bannon. 4, used political network and financial influence to broker a security cooperation agreement between Israel and Mongolia. He also writes here, heck, the Israeli government even installed and maintained the security system at the Manhattan apartment that Epstein frequently lent out to Barak. Yes, whatever else Epstein may have been doing, it seems he was working diligently behind the scenes as an agent of influence to promote Israeli interests around the world. But Epstein is dead, and as you may have heard. So, how will Israel wield its power and influence over foreign diplomats and businessmen now that they can no longer rely on their favorite fixer? As it turns out, we can catch a glimpse of this answer in the Epstein files too. So I would stay up to date with Corbett's reporting. If you want to go to his website, you can just put your email in and at least get his newsletters for things like this as he's going through the Epstein files. If you want to stay up to date, he just does quick little updates here or there as to what he's been learning if you would like to continue to stay up to date. So friends, I hope this gave you a little bit of information, a zoomed out perspective. I know I got a little bit in the weeds, but I gave you some zoomed out perspective on how this story started, where it really started taking off, and where we're at today. And I think this is going to be an ongoing story for a long time. If you really are interested, roll up your sleeves, look at the links below, do some research on your own to gain a better understanding. But my main point I want to say here is there's more to this story. And I think it's important to note that we were basically told, we were gaslit into thinking that there's nothing to this story. So we had people who were in the Trump administration who wanted to get elected, and they ran on there being corruption, a little black book, things going on the island. And then they get into power, nothing comes out, then it goes back, and then they get back into power, and now they're being pressed for certain things to come out. Then we're being told it was a hoax, you're stupid, there was nothing to this story, Epstein didn't kill himself, or Epstein did kill himself, etc., etc. And now from there, here we are, 3 million documents released, 3 more million to be released, and this is being reported in a way that's pointing to the KGB or Russia. It's also pointing to Dems versus Republicans. It's also being used to show how pro-Trump, in regards to Trump and being used as he's some sort of savior in the QAnon movement, releasing this information in the certain way that he is, and basically creating excuses as to why this information wasn't released before. He was talking about it all the way in 2015. And then from there, how many arrests have been made? Have there been any arrests? Has there been any true accountability or justice for what this is? And then from there, if this is a foreign intelligence operation, what's going on? Like, shouldn't we want to look into it if our government is being blackmailed? That seems like kind of a big deal. So just a few different things to think about from the Epstein perspective, and also as to maybe why we're not getting the full story or the information, and why the data drops are so ambiguous and very difficult to research and go through together, and why it feels overwhelming, and maybe it's intentionally being reported that way or done that way. So connecting the dots is a lot more difficult than it should be. So friends, again, I hope this helped you. As always, roll up your sleeves, do your own research, look at the links below, think critically, live intentionally, don't trust everything you hear, question everything, and do your own research. Well, thanks for watching, friends. Get a cup of coffee before you get into the rest of the links. You'll need some caffeine. I'll be talking to you soon.